I began subletting a rental house cabin for a couple months in 2023 when my dad and I were bucking heads and I needed to move out. The actual renter of the apartment was having his own personal issues causing him to leave the apartment, and I'll just refer to him as my landlord to make it easier. The cabin was an entire unit rental, and it was paid month to month, which was ideal for my temporarily shitty situation. It was 2 floors technically, a small kitchen, decent-sized living space, and 1 bedroom that you had to climb a little flight of stairs to get to, and there was a quirky hatch-type door that you'd have to open to get to the upstairs bedroom. I had already been there for a month. I paid for the second month's rent already by this point, so I was fully situated there. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road with a few other similarly sized cabin-type houses. One was vacant as far as I knew because I never saw cars parked out front or lights on. The other houses, well, I never met the neighbors, but I knew people lived in them. I work 12-hour shifts sometimes, and when I get home, I'm completely exhausted and will just go straight to bed and watch TV until I fall asleep. This was one of those nights. I got home, made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a protein shake as my late night dinner, then went to bed. I always shut the door on the floor every night. I find myself to be uncomfortable at night having the entrance to your bedroom opened. Something about it makes me feel exposed or vulnerable, though this door on the floor didn't have a lock. This cabin was made for 1 person or a couple. I was watching TV in bed when I heard it. A voice from down below saying, "Who's up there?" I instantly felt my heart stop for a second as I shot up to an upright position. It sounded like it came from inside the house, but it also could have maybe come from outside. I grabbed the TV remote to turn off the TV. I crawled over to look at the circular window above the bed. I didn't see anyone out there, but it was also very dark. I said, "Who's there?" And the deafening silence that followed afterwards led me to getting off the bed and putting my hand on the handle to the door. I lifted the door and looked down the staircase. I actually said my dad's name, thinking maybe he came over. When there was no response, I walked downstairs. I was extremely scared. I flicked on the first light switch I passed. The living room lit up. As I expected in the back of my head, there wasn't anyone down there. I was still chalking this up to someone from outside. I turned on the front outside light and looked out the windows, and there wasn't anyone in front. By this point, I was really confused. I turned off the living room light and climbed the stairs back to my bedroom, shutting the door on the floor. I was pretty awake now, so I turned the TV back on, and not even 5 minutes later, I heard pounds on the bedroom door from below. They sounded angry or like they were supposed to scare me. If there was any doubt before, this confirmed it. Someone was in the house. I left the TV on this time and just stayed completely motionless because I was genuinely too scared to move an inch. The scariest part was whoever was down there could easily open the door as there was no lock. I laid silent for about 20 minutes, and once I felt comfortable to move, I looked for my phone, and of course, of all times, it wasn't on my nightstand. I couldn't find it. I may have left it downstairs. So I opened the door of my bedroom and looked down the stairs. With the constantly changing light from the TV screen, I could see just a little bit down the stairs to the living room. So I went down the stairs quietly, and when at the bottom, instead of turning on any lights, I ran out the back door barefoot and ran to the nearest neighbor's house where I knew people lived, and I saw their lights were on. I knocked on the door a bunch of times, and then I noticed someone at the window next to the door, looking at me. I didn't know how long they had been watching me. I yelled through the glass explaining what happened, that I'm his neighbor, and that I need a phone to call the police. He definitely heard me, but he just stared at me. It was unsettling, and I started to back away from the door as I realized he wasn't even responding to me, just creepily watching me. I looked around the road and saw no other houses in the distance with their lights on. Momentarily, I had a thought. What if that guy had something to do with it? I went back to my rental through the back door, which was closed just like I left it. I went inside and locked it and turned on every light in the tiny house. I looked not only for an intruder, but my phone downstairs, and I finally found my phone in my car when I thought to look there. I was so tired earlier that I left it in the center console. I went back inside. The TV was still on up in the bedroom. I climbed the stairs, and when I got to the top, I saw someone sitting on my bed, staring at the TV. It was a man. I screamed, and he turned his head slowly to look at me. and before I could see anything else, I ran back down the stairs and outside, and now with my phone called 911. I sat in my locked car watching the house on the line with 911, and I saw someone walking past the backyard of the house, disappearing into the woods. I told the operator this. When a police car arrived, the one officer checked the house and upstairs room after I told him that I saw someone, most likely the intruder, walk away into the woods. He asked if I had any other places to stay that night, and so I swallowed my pride and went back to my dad's house for the night after packing some of my important stuff. I returned to the house the next day and stayed another night, then collected the rest of my stuff. Luckily, the landlord agreed to giving me some of my money back. He asked me what the man looked like, and after that, he didn't ask any more questions, which to me is pretty sus. Something was unusual in that situation, from that creepy neighbor ignoring me to the landlord's random urgent need to move out, to someone full-on breaking into the house. Maybe it's all connected, or maybe I'm overthinking it. It was a Tuesday night around 11 p.m. in 2013, and I was walking down a dimly lit street at night on my way home from work. My car had been in the shop, so I'd been forced to walk 3 miles home every day. The walk was barely an hour, so I was home before midnight. I live in a small town in southern Indiana, so after 10 there's rarely any cars on the road. The only vehicles you ever see are truckers heading to Indianapolis. I was about a mile into the walk when I turned on a dirt road. My house was off the beaten path, so I had to take all these dirt roads surrounded by forest to get there. As I was turning, I heard the sound of a motor in the distance, and it was getting closer very slowly. I saw about a quarter mile down the stretch of road I just turned off of a van moving very slowly, without its lights. At first, this didn't strike me as out of place due to the fact that the town I live in there is a pretty cheap car dealership that sells used cars and vans with broken parts, like broken headlights. So I just assumed this guy was one of their clients. I kept walking down the side road with the van still going slowly down the main road. About 5 seconds later, I jumped when I heard the sound of the van roar, and it sped up really fast, except now it had its lights on. I was startled, but not worried. This was until the van got closer to the turn for the side road. About 500 feet away from the turn, the van turned off its lights again and slowed down. Now I was officially creeped out. I didn't want to seem startled, so I just walked faster down the road. I kept turning back constantly to see if I was being followed. Then my suspicions became reality as I saw the van turn onto the dirt road. I was only about 500 feet from the van, so I started to walk a lot faster. I didn't want to look back, but I did just to be safe, and what I saw frightened every bone in my body. I saw the van there, stopped with both the passenger and driver's doors open. At this point, I ran for my life down the dirt road. I heard what I'm positive was a gunshot not far away, and I really thought this was how I was going to die. I made a quick turn into one of the surrounding forests and hid behind a big rock. I heard what sounded like a middle-aged man not far away say, "I think she went into the woods." And then, to my horror, what sounded like 3 young girls, with one of them responding, "Okay, sir, I'll see if we can find her." Now I wasn't fearing for my life. I was worrying I was going to be forced into whatever sick group this was. I was covering my mouth, trying not to make any sound, when I heard the man say, "Whoever finds her doesn't have to drink the blood tonight." A million thoughts ran through my head. Is this some sort of satanic cult? Are these girls kidnapped? Will I become one of them? I spent what felt like an eternity sitting behind a rock being scared of any sound that I could hear. Then, to my relief, I heard cop sirens nearby. I stayed there just to be safe. When I felt the courage to look from behind the rock, I saw red and blue lights right outside the forest. I ran out screaming for help, and the cops came to me and said, "Ma'am, do you know about this body?" I was confused and said, "What body?" Then I saw in front of the cop car the most gruesome thing I will ever see. It was what looked like a naked young woman, gutted, blood everywhere. There was no van in sight. I then explained everything to the cops. The car, the man, the girls who had to drink the blood. The cops said they'd look into it and were nice enough to drive me home. That night, when I couldn't sleep, I looked out my window to see the van, the same one from before, driving slowly without its lights on down my street. This time I was smart and wrote down the license plate. I called the cops immediately and told them what I saw and gave the license plate number. As expected, when the cops came, the van was long gone. But what they told me is what will horrify me to this day. The cops said we checked the license plate number. It's a plate registered in South Dakota. But the thing is, we checked with other precincts around the country, and they've gotten reports tonight that there was also a suspicious van with that license plate. One in Vermont, one in Nevada, one in Alaska, and one in Texas. They said we'll call you if we get any more information. The cops left, and I never got a call. I don't really believe in the paranormal, so my best guess is that it was some sort of cult that used fake license plates to do their sick things all across the country, but I guess I'll never know. I moved out of Indiana, and now I make sure when I see something suspicious, I bolt. My wife and I live in a normal suburb. We have normal jobs, normal lives, next to normal neighbors. We live the, I guess you'd say, standard American lifestyle that most of us are taught by our parents to achieve. Me sitting down to write this story is already saying something because I'm not a writer. The last time I typed something out this long was the last paper I wrote in college. But something happened not that long ago that no one can explain, and it still scares us to this day. My wife Gianna and I had a normal day, and after work, we decided to go out to eat for a change, and we got back around 9. We don't stay up very late on work nights, so by 9:30 we were brushing our teeth getting ready for bed. By 10 o'clock we were in bed, and we usually shut the lights off at 11. We either read our books or watch our show. Tonight we were watching our show. Then the phone rang. Gianna told me not to answer it. Anyone calling at this hour can't be good news. I agreed with her, but for that reason, I said I should pick it up in case it's an emergency. So I reached over for the phone next to the bed to pick it up, but it stopped ringing before I could actually lift the receiver. That old landline was trash. The second a call stopped, the caller ID would disappear, and there wasn't a way to check the call history. Oh well, wrong number. But a few minutes later, the phone rang again, so I grabbed the phone and looked at the screen. It said unknown number. Gianna and I both thought that was unusual, especially past 10 o'clock. I feel that there's a generally accepted cutoff time for phone calls, and that's after 9 p.m. I didn't pick up the phone, but right after it stopped ringing, the phone rang again. Suddenly, it felt like it was an emergency, like God forbid something happened to a relative, so I picked up in a hurry. On the other end, it was the voice of my neighbor, Al. He asked me if I knew that man standing out in front of my house. I said, "What are you talking about?" He told me to go outside and hung up. I found it insanely bizarre the way he'd just hang up abruptly like that. Gianna's face when I told her what Al just said was a look of fear. She said, "Don't go out there." I said, "I'm just gonna look out the window." I went downstairs and moved the curtain a bit to look out to the front lawn. There was definitely no one standing outside. I opened the front door and then the storm door and stepped out to the front stoop. I looked around and looked into the bushes right in front of the house. Nobody. So I got a little annoyed at the idea that Al would prank call us this late on a work night. It also just felt a little out of character for him to do that. I went back to bed and told Gianna that no one was out there and Al was probably messing with us. She was just as confused by that as I was. It just felt bizarre. She told me to call him, and so I did, but it rang and went straight to voicemail. So I left a voicemail saying, "Hey Al, what was that call about? Give me a call back." Then the phone rang. It said unknown caller again. I picked up, and it was Al again, saying before I could even say anything, "Go outside. There's someone standing outside your house." He said it in a calm, slow voice. Then he hung up. I got up and said out loud, "Alright, what the hell is going on?" I told Gianna to wait here. I went downstairs and back to the window. I looked through the curtain, and this time I saw someone standing right at the end of our walkway where it met the sidewalk. He had a hood over his head, effectively covering his face to just blackness. I was honestly shaken. I opened my door and said outside, "Can I help you?" The man just stood in place. I threatened him with calling the police. Then the house phone rang again. I closed the front door and went to the kitchen phone, and this time noticed the caller ID showed my neighbor Al's number. I picked up, and Al said in a much more normal voice, "Hey, I just got your voicemail. What was that about? I didn't call you." I was so confused. I swore to him he just called me twice, telling me about a man outside my house. He sounded even more confused than me. Then moments later, he said he doesn't see anyone outside my house. I went back out to look out the window, and that man who was standing outside my house was gone. I demanded Al tell me right now if this was a joke, and if I found out it was and he wouldn't tell me, we'd have a problem. Al claimed he was telling the truth, and he's not some immature prankster kind of guy. He's a very low-key, respectful person. I had to put him on speaker so Gianna could vouch for me that I wasn't going crazy, and that we did in fact get 2 calls from someone who sounded just like him. He did the same and put his wife on the phone as well to vouch for him. In the end, what could he really say though, except for it sounds like someone was pranking us. Eventually, we got off the phone, but I was no less horrified than I was before. I had to go back downstairs one more time to hang up the downstairs phone, and so I looked outside one more time. The man was still no longer there. None of us could ever figure out this unexplainable situation. This was something that happened so long ago that a lot of details are a little blurry. It's not like it happened yesterday. I'll try my best to fill in smaller details that I don't fully remember with how I best remember things played out. It was the last day of school. I was in the 4th grade. 4th grade was the last year in our elementary school where kids had to be picked up by their parents. 5th graders were allowed to walk home on their own. My mom would always be the one to pick me up. On the last day of school, my friend Dennis and I had a playdate planned to celebrate the last day of school. Dennis wasn't in my class this year, but we had been friends since kindergarten. He was in a different dismissal hallway from me. After school was over, we single file lined up and walked to the exit door at the end of the hall, where we waited outside by our teacher, Miss Blue. I waited for Dennis's dad to appear from the crowd of parents shuffling in and out of the parking lot next to the doors. Then I heard my name. "Tommy, Tommy." I look over and see a man waving at me as he approached. He introduced himself as Dennis's uncle and said he was picking me up. I went over to Miss Blue and said I'm being picked up. She asked, "Where is he, sweetie?" And I pointed to Dennis's uncle who waved at Miss Blue. Miss Blue dismissed me and I went with the man. He led us through the crowd and was a very quick and jittery talker, like he spoke fast and had a bit of a stutter. He was walking incredibly fast. It was almost hard to keep up with him with my backpack on. He explained to me that his brother, or Dennis's dad, was working later than expected, so he was driving me back. We got to his car, which was a dark red hatchback type car from what I remember, and it took me this long to acknowledge the giant elephant in the room. Where was Dennis? Why weren't we picking him up too? The man turned to look at me in the back seat and said that Dennis was already at his house. I was shy around people I didn't know, especially adults, and I wasn't one to openly speak my mind if I was confused. But I was very confused. This was making less and less sense. The whole drive, the man kept yapping, telling stories of his days in elementary, asking me questions like what sports I played, what we're learning in class. If I had to guess, we were in the car for like 10 minutes, which honestly for our town where houses were right on top of each other, that was a while. My house was a 5-minute walk away from the school. We were definitely in an area I wasn't familiar with when he parked the car in front of his house. His house looked pretty normal to me from what I remember. He led us inside and shut the door and locked it behind us. It was really, really dark inside the place, and I realized why. All the curtains were shut. It almost felt like it was nighttime in there, especially because the only source of light was a dim lamp in the corner of the room. He then looked at me and smiled. I said, "Where's Dennis?" And he started acting really jittery and nervous seeming. He said something like, "Oh, I think he's downstairs playing video games. Give me a second. Wait here." He then disappeared into a nearby room, and I heard a door open and then footsteps descending into a basement. I know my heart was already racing. I knew I was in danger. I went to the door to quietly try to open it, but I couldn't. It had some kind of lock that must have needed a key for. I really started to panic now, yet I still probably held out a little bit of hope that Dennis would be coming up those stairs. But I knew the chances of that were slim. I regretted entering that house. I did the only thing I could think to do. I went to the kitchen and found a phone hung on the wall. I picked it off the receiver and dialed 911. The first thing I said when they answered was in a whisper, "Please come to this house, I've been kidnapped." They heard me, they acknowledged me, but I didn't say another word. I hid the phone under a towel in the corner of the room with 911 still on the line. I hurried back to where the man left me as I already heard his footsteps coming back upstairs. Then he called my name, saying, "Come down, Dennis is down here." Then there was a pause. He repeated my name, and when I didn't answer, he came up the stairs fully to look at me. He asked me if I was okay. I felt so sick, and I was so scared. I hated myself for walking into this situation and not being wiser. I asked in a very scared voice if I could leave, and I remember the change in his face. His fake, friendly smile disappeared as he realized that I was no longer falling for this. He walked closer to me in a gentle manner until he was close enough to grab my wrist aggressively, and he started pulling me towards the basement. I screamed and cried, and he screamed at me, "I'll let you go if you stop and behave." So I listened. I went down the stairs, and halfway down, the door slammed shut behind me, and I heard it lock. I walked fully down the stairs to this empty, unfinished basement with a concrete floor and one singular support beam in the middle of the room. There was a depressing yellow glow in the room from one exposed light bulb hanging on the ceiling. If there was a place you'd imagine kidnapped children to go, this would be it. I heard his heavy footsteps upstairs. You could hear everything in this house. I don't know what he was doing, but I heard him walking around for a while. Then he came to the basement door, opened it, and he called down asking if I'm hungry. I replied no. I didn't want him going into the kitchen seeing the missing phone. He shut the door and locked it again. I sat down there, waiting, with my heart in my throat, and then I heard it. The doorbell ringing 3 times from upstairs, followed by banging sounds, which were definitely the sounds of police banging on the door. I would refrain from screaming until I heard the front door open, but I never heard the man's footsteps approach the door. The doorbell kept ringing, and I kept hearing the bangs. This went on for some time, until I heard a really loud bang sound, and then multiple heavy footsteps and multiple screaming voices. I started screaming for help as loud as I could at the top of the stairs, banging on the door. The door was unlocked, and a police officer on the other side grabbed hold of me and hurried me outside. There were at least 3 cop cars outside. I had to tell everything to 2 of the cops outside as we waited for my parents to show up. The man from inside was brought outside and into a cop car in handcuffs, and that was the last time I ever saw him. When my parents arrived on the scene, my mom was bawling her eyes out. There had already been a whole scene at the school as cops were called and Dennis's dad realized what happened. This man was a work associate of Dennis's father. When he somehow learned that Dennis's dad would be picking up Dennis and I from school on the last day, he seized the opportunity to do what he did. A complete sick fuck. I don't know how he found out what I looked like. As I got older, I never really asked for more details because I try not to think about it. My mom went to counseling with me for months after this incident. Let's just say my parents didn't have kind words for Miss Blue, not verifying if I actually knew the person picking me up. If I didn't think to call the police before he basically threw me in that basement, I know for a fact I'd be dead right now. This was like 17 years ago. That man might be out of prison for all I know. It was junior year of high school, and it was the last day of school. A lot of people cut school this day or left early after lunch period. My friends and I were some of the latter. It was a stormy, dark day. A bunch of people from our grade originally planned to hit the beach on the last day of school, but that was obviously canceled. So my smaller core group of friends decided to do something else. There used to be an abandoned elementary school in town that hadn't been used for like 10 years. There were plans to tear it down by the year's end. So, still wanting to do something fun on the last day of school, we all agreed to break into the building and just fuck around exploring. There were no cameras in that old building, and on a stormy day, no one would be outside monitoring the place or anything, so we all left after lunch period. Our friend Eddie already had a car and his license, so he drove us all to the abandoned school. The school was in the middle of a neighborhood, not on any main roads or anything. There was a back parking lot covered by overgrown bushes and trees on one side, and the walls of the school on 2 other sides. It was a perfect spot to park and go unnoticed. The place wasn't boarded up or anything, it was just locked up. Eddie had a baseball bat in his trunk that he took out to smash one of the windows of the school. I was honestly so nervous that even through the pouring rain, one of the houses over the fence would hear the smashing sound. We all watched and nervously laughed as Eddie swung the bat into the window in front of the car, and after a few good swings, smashing it. He pushed away the stray pieces of glass stuck to the frame with the bat, and then he waved us over. We one by one climbed through the window into the school. My logic was that the school was being torn down anyway. What does a broken window matter? We all were inside the building now. The window we climbed through was actually one of the windows for a classroom. A lot of stuff was still left in the room, including the desks and some decorations on the walls. Based on the decorations, it looked like we were in a 4th or 5th grade classroom. It was very surreal to be inside of what was once an active classroom where little kids would come to learn. Now nothing but a cold, dark, and abandoned room collecting dust waiting to be destroyed. The sounds of thunder and lightning outside also added to the surreal feeling of it all. There were no lights on in the building. Power to the place was likely cut completely. We anticipated this though. The flashlights on our phones were plenty to get around and see. Even without them, it wasn't completely pitch black in there, as even though it was a dark day, some light was still creeping in through the windows and doors. We started traversing the hallways, going from room to room. Each classroom was still full of desks and chairs that hadn't been sat in probably a decade. We all 4 were in the same classroom when there was a sound that echoed down the hallway and into the classroom. We all went silent and turned off our lights for a moment. After a flash of lightning, we slowly accepted that it was probably nothing, so we continued on. We just went from room to room as our wet shoes all squeaked on the floors. Sneaking around wasn't possible, really. A lot of things in the school were visibly decaying. You could really tell no one had stepped foot in there in ages. As we neared the corner of the hall, I turned around just to look back down the other way, and at the doorway of one of the classrooms, it looked like there was something sticking out from the classroom. I asked my friends to also look. Their lights would maybe help see what it was. When all 4 of us were pointing our phone flashlights toward the door, whatever that thing we were seeing was retracted into the classroom. All 4 of us quietly went "oh shit" amongst ourselves, and we started running down the intersecting hallway. We stopped when we were far enough away. It seemed we were in the kindergarten wing now. Then we heard another sound echo from down the hallway. It seemed we weren't alone. But who could be in here was the question. The place was locked up, and every light in the building was off. The sound scared us into going into the first classroom we could find and shutting the door. It was indeed a kindergarten classroom. We were now concerned we'd get in trouble, so we waited in silence with our flashlights off. The rain was still coming down hard, and there was still thunder and lightning crashing every 20 seconds or so. Suddenly, the door to the classroom clicked open, and someone pushed it as it eerily creaked to a fully open position. We didn't see anyone at the doorway though, and the hallway was almost pitch black. We all tried our best to stay quiet. And then, slowly, something appeared through the doorway. It was the shape of a head. We all saw it, and when there was another flash of lightning, we saw what it was. It was in fact someone's head, looking into the classroom directly at us. I started apologizing for all of us, saying we're leaving. The person at the doorway didn't move. They motionlessly and almost lifelessly just peered around the doorway in the classroom. Eddie asked, "Do you work here?" No response. Eddie had a "fuck this" moment clearly. He handed me the bat as he struggled to unlock one of the windows to slide it open just enough to crawl through. He crawled out first, then my other 2 friends, and I was last. Before I crawled out, I looked back one more time at the head at the doorway. I crawled through as quickly as I could, fearing I'd hear the person run up behind me and grab my legs. Once I was out, I ran to catch up with my friends who were already booking it back to Eddie's car. We drove out of there in a hurry and never looked back. The building was torn down later that year and has since been turned into a park. We never got in trouble for breaking in. To this day, we have no idea if that was some kind of worker or just some random person. Either way, it was extremely creepy behavior on their part. When I was a freshman in college, I took a chemistry class. It was really difficult for me. The tables were arranged in groups of 4. I sat at a middle table at the left side all the way to the end. Next to me was a guy named Zach. He was very awkward. He gave me Reddit moderator vibes. To describe his appearance, he was like 5'8", he was a little overweight, and he had a really ugly, patchy beard. But he knew his stuff in chemistry. I think he was just good in school overall. We started to talk in a pretty cordial way when he noticed I sucked in class, and I would ask him for help. He started offering to do my homework for me, and he even let me cheat off him on tests. I never got any kind of flirtatious vibes from Zach, but that might have been because he was just too awkward to flirt in person. He eventually asked for my number so that he could send me homework-related stuff. Obviously, I gave it to him. He was helping me out a ton and didn't give off any threatening vibes. He just seemed a little reclusive. Fast forward to the last day of class, and Zach did something completely unexpected. He asked me if I wanted to go on a date with him after class. I had no physical attraction to Zach in the slightest, and our personalities were complete opposites. But he did help me throughout the semester maintain an A, so I had to let him down super politely. I lied and told him I'm going away to Miami for the next couple of weeks and won't be around. He right away responded, "What about when you get back?" I felt like 2 weeks was long enough of a gap in seeing each other where he would probably lose interest. So I said, "Yeah, I could be around," or something like that. He responded with a really cringy "cool" as he nodded his head in response. From here till the end of class that day was really awkward for me. After class, I left straight for my car and drove right home. I was a commuter, not a dormer, so after the last day of class was over, that was it. It was Thursday, and my other friends who went to the same school wanted to go out that night, so we hit town that night, and at some point, I got a text from Zach. He asked, "When are you going to Miami?" I told my friends all about Zach while we were drunk, how he got me an A, but now he wanted a date. My friends joked that I should just go on the date with him to be nice. I joked back sarcastically, "Yeah, for sure." I told myself I'd respond to it later, but I was drunk and completely forgot to. The next day, I woke up to 2 follow-up texts, one with question marks, and then the next one, "You're going to ignore me now that you don't need me anymore, right?" So I replied, "Hey, I'm sorry, I was packing. I'm going to Miami today." He replied almost instantly saying, "Okay." Obviously, there was no Miami trip, but he should have never found that out. Later that night, my girls and I went out again, and while out, I got a scary text from Zach saying, "I thought you said you were going to Miami tonight." I almost dropped my drink when I saw this. I showed it to my girls, and they were all freaked out just like I was. I replied to Zach, "What do you mean?" And he replied, "Nothing, forget it. I just don't like liars." I genuinely was scared that I was being stalked. I looked around the whole bar, but he wasn't there, at least as far as I knew. So what the hell? I just didn't answer. At that point, I never planned on answering him again. It wasn't until late that night, shortly after I got home, like literally taking my shoes off inside, that there were knocks at the door. It had to be like 1 a.m. I said, "Who is it?" And it was Zach on the other side. He said, "It's me." I wanted to scream. I was home alone. I yelled through the door to leave, or my dad will come out and kick your ass. That seemed to work as he didn't knock again. I texted everyone I knew about the situation. My family, all my friends. I was horrified. Some suggested calling the police. I said I would go to the nearest station tomorrow, but tomorrow didn't even come yet when I received a super long, disgustingly weird and creepy text from guess who? I was appalled when I picked up my phone and read it. This is what it said. "I'm feeling a lot of emotions right now after being used by someone for months and then lied to, and hurt and anger are 2 of them. I thought from the start of the semester in chemistry class that our chemistry was through the roof. No pun intended. I must say, I am hurt that you would make up something as elaborate as a 2-week-long Miami trip just to avoid going out with me, even after I stuck my neck out for you all semester and risked my own academic standing. I definitely have noticed the way you looked at me sometimes in class, and I can't pretend there wasn't a hint of interest there. All I'm asking for at this point is for 1 date. That's it. I'm not asking your hand at marriage, though I surely would be quite an ideal husband to have if I do say so myself. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you needed more time to think over the prospect of going on a date with me. I know how much I have to offer, much more than these losers all over campus. If you want, I can come back to your house and we could talk about it in person. I am only making this offer once. I'm just very crushed to feel like I wasted so much this semester for nothing in return. Yours truly, Zach." I sent this to everyone. I didn't care that it was 3 a.m. I called my dad until he picked up, and I told him how scared I was. After he read the text, he took it upon himself to send Zach a lengthy text of his own, and he attempted to call him like 10 times, but Zach is clearly too much of a coward to pick up that phone call. I also went to the police station the next day with the text saying I wanted to press charges, and one of the people working there said that Zach would be contacted. Zach never picked up any of the calls from the police who were trying to get him to come in for questioning, nor did he answer any of their text messages. Zach completely disappeared. I never heard from him again. Between the police contacting him and my dad's pretty scary texts and voicemails, that basement-dwelling creep probably was shitting himself. Luckily, I never saw him on campus again or anything like that. But I can say, I know what it's like to deal with an actual stalker. When I was 21 years old, I would be home alone at my parents' house a lot. We lived on a little pond which was directly in our backyard. On the other side of the pond was a little town park. Our neighbors were a bit spaced out. It was a pretty upscale, expensive block compared to the rest of the town, so the properties were big. I'm fully moved out now, but this was back when I was in college. My parents make a lot of money, and we have multiple homes, so often I was home alone. It was a random night in the summertime. I was off from school, so I can't remember if it was the weekend or a weekday, but odds are since I was home, it was a random weekday. I was in the back sunroom watching a show. That was my favorite room in the house in the summer because it was the most cozy and had the best breeze with all the windows open. I was right on the corner of the couch closest to the corner window when I heard splashing from outside, like in the pond. It could have been a goose or duck. Sometimes they'd fight in the water and make a bunch of splashing sounds, so at first I ignored it, but as it persisted, I decided to lower the volume on the TV and listen. I put my ear up to the window even, and I heard consistent splashing sounds, way too heavy to be from a duck or goose. It sounded like they were splashes from a person. I opened the door in the sunroom and stepped outside to the deck. I looked out to the pitch darkness of the backyard. I now heard a man's humming along with the splashes. Someone was definitely swimming in the water. They were trespassing. Each house on the pond owned a specific chunk of the pond. I stepped inside for a second to flick on the lights to the backyard deck. As I did this, just a bit of the pond was exposed, and the splashes and humming stopped. Whoever it was clearly saw me. I wondered if it was one of the neighbors going for a swim or something, which also just seemed weird because no one really swam in the pond ever. But honestly, whether it was or wasn't a neighbor, I wasn't going to confront whoever it was. I stepped back inside and turned off the lights, of course locking the door as well. I texted my brother who was away at college about it. He didn't answer right away. I was trying not to creep myself out over it, but watching TV after this was kind of hard. I couldn't focus on the show. I looked out the window, but all I could see outside was darkness. I still had the TV on in the background, not realizing how revealing the light from the TV would be outside. And then, I thought I heard something on the deck. I hurried to find the remote and turn off the TV, and as the room went black and silent, it took me a few seconds to adjust, and realize that there was the sound of someone's heavy breathing right outside one of the many windows in the room. I instantly laid down flat on the couch to try and hide myself, and after a short moment of silence, a deep voice from outside the window said, "I see you." My heart dropped into my stomach. I couldn't decide in the moment whether to speak or keep hiding, so I just blurted out, "Paul, is that you?" Paul was the name of one of our neighbors. I said this clinging on to the hope that maybe it was him, and he was just messing with me, but the man outside didn't respond to this. I just heard footsteps walking away. As the barefoot-sounding footsteps faded to silence, I still laid flat on the couch, too afraid to move. I laid for a few minutes, before the thought to go check that all the doors were locked came to mind. I exploded off the couch and ran straight for the front door. It was locked, as was the side entrance door. After a little while longer and texting my entire family about what was going on, my dad told me to turn the backyard lights on and check if anyone was still out there. He basically told me to be the man of the house and protect it. So I listened and checked the back deck through the window. It was clear. I brought a big knife outside with me onto the deck, and I looked down. There were wet footprints that had half dried by then, but I could tell that they were barefoot footprints. I followed the trail of footprints around to the side part of the deck, and what I saw was nightmare fuel. The top part of someone's head, namely their eyes and forehead, was peering just over the edge of the deck from the ground below, looking at me as if he heard me coming and was waiting. As we made eye contact, he turned away, and by now I was ready to call 911. I did so before even telling my parents. I locked myself inside, waiting for them, and when they came, I felt instantly better. They asked if our family had any enemies or people who don't like us, or if we have any problem neighbors. Questions like this. They did do a quick sweep of the property and then left. I decided to shut every window that night and run the air conditioning just for added safety. When I awoke the next morning, I was just delighted to see sunlight. I don't believe that man ever returned to our house, and we still don't know who it could have been. I have a dog who I take for a walk 3 times a day. First in the morning, then in the afternoon, and finally at night. I take him on the same route every time, which is through our driveway exit, which leads to a cul-de-sac parking lot for the condominium complex we live in. This will make sense soon as to why I'm telling you this. On the night walk, I always go somewhat late. I'm not sure why, but it's been a habit ever since I've had him, cabin and it's never been a problem in 2023 when my dad and I were butting heads and began our final walk of the day. The actual renter of the apartment was having his own personal issues causing him to leave the apartment. There are no lights at the parking lot. I'll just refer to him listening to music with only one AirPod, as I feel it would be for the best. Was an entire unit something unusual, and it was paid month to month, which was ideal for my temporarily shitty situation. I was hearing something. It was 2 floors of some kind that was up ahead of me. Small kitchen, decent-sized living space, zoned out in my own world that you had to climb a little flight of stairs to get to. But then my mind finally caught up, hatch type door that you'd have to open to get to the AirPod out bedroom. And stood still to listen. I had already been there for a month. I was only hearing things. I paid for the second month's rent already by this point. So I was fully situated there. But I couldn't see anyone. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road. I did the stupid thing. A few other similarly sized cabins forward because I thought it was all in my head. One was vacant as far as something didn't feel right. I never saw cars parked out front. I stopped again after a few feet, right next to where all the cars were neighbors. But I knew people lived in there. My flashlight pointed everywhere. I worked 12-hour shifts sometimes. I stayed. When I get home, I'm completely exhausted. That has ever happened to me yet. Straight to bed and watch hearing a muffled voice, what sounded like a kid say the word "help." I got home, made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a protein shake as my frantically pointed my flashlight everywhere to see where it was coming from. I always shut the door in the floor. I was sure it was coming from the cars. I find myself completely thrown off by this. Having the entrance to your bedroom wasn't a kid in sight. Something about it makes me feel exposed or vulnerable. It was just me and my dog. The door on the floor didn't have a lock. Didn't seem to notice anything. This cabin was made for one person or a couple. And then I heard it again. TV in bed. The word "help" was spoken 3 more times down below, and it was coming from my left side where the cars were parked. I instantly felt my heart stop for a second as I shot up to an upright position, and I knew I wasn't imagining this when I saw my dog's ears perked up. Also, he was looking in the same direction I was facing after it happened. I grabbed the TV remote to turn off the TV. That's when it hit me about how incredibly eerie to look at the circular window above the bed. After hearing it multiple times, I didn't see anyone out there. I realized the kid's voice didn't sound entirely like a kid. I said, I don't know how to explain it. In a deafening silence that followed afterwards, and the child getting off the bed and putting my hand on the handle to the door. Not only was the voice always muffled and looked down the staircase, it was spoken in a more generic said my dad's name as opposed to a cry for actual help every time. There was no response. And I mean that literally. There was absolutely no change in the tone, inflection, sound, or anything of sorts. My dog and I ran straight home as I expected in the back of my head. I tried to explain to my mom what happened. There wasn't anyone down there. She was puzzled herself about what it could have been. I was still chalking this up to someone from outside. I suggested we call the cops. I turned on the front outside was actually someone in need of help, and there wasn't anyone in front. It was necessary. By this point, I was really confused. Many questions were conjuring up in my head. I turned off the living room light. Why was the voice muffled? Climbed the stairs back to my bedroom. Was there someone in the car that I couldn't see? Or was it something darker waiting for me to move closer? I turned the TV back on. I don't like to think too much about it. 5 minutes later, whatever it was, I heard it still makes me feel extremely disturbed to this day. Pounds on the bedroom door. This picture is where I had stopped and taken my AirPods out to listen. They were supposed to scare me. It up ahead on the left. If there was any doubt before, this is where I had gotten closer and heard it on my left side. Someone was in the house. I'm aware that there's a condo complex on the right side, which some may think the noise was coming from.
Genuinely
But it
too
was in
scared
this
to move an
direction,
inch.
facing the cars, where my dog and I
Scariest
heard
part
it.
was whoever
You
was
could see
down
from
there
this
could
point of
easily
view,
open the door.
there's nothing
There
to
was
really
no
indicate
lock.
a noise coming from somewhere
I laid
else.
silent for about
Also,
20
at
minutes.
the time this happened,
Once I felt comfortable
cars that
to
were
move,
parked were
I
trucks
looked for
and
my
SUV
phone.
types,
And of course,
they were a lot larger,
wasn't
covering
on my
more
nightstand.
space,
I
thus
couldn't
making
find
it
it.
harder to see
I
from
may
where
have
I was
left it
standing.
downstairs.
I never
So
figured
I
this
opened
out.
the door of my bedroom and looked down the stairs. With the constantly changing light from the TV screen, I could see just a little bit down the stairs to the living room. So I went down the stairs quietly.
What
I
I'm
went at
about
the
to tell
bottom.
you is the
Instead of
reason why
turning
my
on any
parents
lights,
moved out of a
I
house
ran
that
out the
was in the
back door
family for
barefoot.
3
I ran to the
generations.
nearest neighbor's house where I knew
I've
people
struggled
lived.
with depression
I saw their
most of
lights
my
were on.
life. It's hard for
I
me to
knocked on
shake
the door a
feeling
bunch
of
of
being
times,
useless.
and then I noticed someone at
I'm
the
doing
window
much
next
better
to the
now,
door.
but when I was a
looking at
kid,
me.
it was horrible.
I didn't know how long they had been
Because of
watching
that,
me.
I spent a lot
I
of
yelled
time
through the
alone
glass,
in my room.
explaining what happened, that
My
I was
house was
neighbor,
nestled in a
and I
very
need a phone to
woodsy
call
area.
the police.
There were trees on
definitely
3
heard
sides
me,
of it,
but
and a
he just
forest
stared at me.
separating it from any neighbors.
It was unsettling.
My
And I
room
started
was
to
pretty
back
big
away
for
from
a
the door
bedroom.
as I realized
It was
he
in the
wasn't
back
even
corner of the
responding to
house,
me.
so the
Just
windows on 2
creepily
walls
watching
faced
me.
the woods.
I looked
It was
around
honestly
the road,
pretty scary
and
for
saw
a kid
no other
my
houses
age.
in the distance with
It
their
didn't
lights
help
on.
that I was also scared of the dark.
Momentarily, I had a thought.
Things started happening
guy
when I
had
was around
something to
10
do
or
with it.
so. I was in the
I
5th
went back
grade.
to my rental
and I
through
was
the
at the
back
age
door,
where
which
it
was
wasn't
closed
acceptable
just like
to
I
sleep
left
in my
it.
parents' bed after
I
a
went inside
nightmare,
and locked it.
but I
and
was
turned
still
on
accused
every
of
light
having
in
an
the
active
tiny house.
imagination.
I looked not only
The
for an
first thing I
intruder,
noticed
but
was
my
my
phone
nightlight.
downstairs.
It had different
and I
color
finally found my
settings,
phone in my
so if
car
I
when
wanted,
I thought to
I
look
could change
there.
the LED around.
I was so tired earlier.
I liked
that
keeping
left
it
in
on
the center
red, which is what I
console.
fell asleep to
I
most
went back
nights.
inside.
One night, though,
The TV was
I
still
woke
on
up
up in the
randomly in the
bedroom.
middle of the night,
I
which
climbed
was
the
unusual
stairs.
for me.
When I got to the top,
I was really
saw
tired
someone
and fell
sitting
back
on my
asleep
bed,
in under a
staring
minute.
at the TV.
But before I did,
It was a man.
I noticed that my nightlight was a
Screamed,
different
and he
color
turned
than
his
the
head
red I
slowly
always
to
left
look
on.
at me.
I didn't
Before I
think
could
much
see
of it
anything
until
else,
about a week
I ran
later.
back down the stairs and outside.
One morning,
And now
I
with my
woke up
phone,
and
called
realized my
911.
nightlight was once
I
again
sat
not
in my
set to
locked
red
car,
like it always
watching the house
was.
on the line with 911.
I asked my parents
I
why
saw
they were
someone
messing with
walking
my
past the
nightlight.
backyard of the house,
They were
disappearing
confused
into
and
the
told me
woods.
they didn't know what I was
I
talking
told
about.
the operator this.
I explained what had happened
When
to
a police
them.
car
and
arrived,
They told me that the
one
thing had
officer
always
checked
been
the house
glitchy.
and upstairs room.
They knew
After I told
best.
them that I saw
I accepted that
someone,
answer
most likely
for a
the
while.
intruder, walk away
At
into the
least
woods.
until one morning after
He
waking
asked
up
if
to
I
see
had
my
any other
nightlight
places to
unplugged
stay that
completely.
night. And so I
It was
swallowed
just
my
sitting
pride
there on the
and went
floor.
back to my dad's house
Once
for the
again,
night after
my
packing
parents
some of my
dismissed my
important
concern
stuff.
and told me my brain
I
should
returned
be
to the
focused
house
on
the next
school.
day and stayed another
My dad
night,
said I was
then
getting
collected
too
the
old
rest of
for
my
a
stuff.
nightlight anyway.
Luckily, the
A
landlord
few days
agreed to
later,
giving me some of my money
nightlight
back.
was missing completely.
He asked me what
It
the
had
man
seemingly
looked like.
evaporated
After
out of
that,
existence.
he didn't ask any more questions.
Now I knew my
which to
parents
me
were
is
lying
pretty
to me.
sus.
They probably thought I should
Something
have
was
outgrown the
unusual in that
nightlight by then
situation.
and took matters
From that
into their own
creepy
hands.
neighbor ignoring me to
This
the
incident
landlord's
caused a
random
massive
urgent
fight
need to
between
move
them and
out,
I, since
to
both of
someone
us accused
full-on
the other of
breaking into
hiding
the
it,
house.
and neither of us
Maybe
was
it's all
budging.
connected.
I couldn't
Maybe
believe
I'm
my parents would
overthinking it.
blatantly lie to me about something like this, but there was nothing I could do. After that, things went back to normal for a week. That didn't last long, though. 3
It was
nights
a
in a row,
Tuesday night
I
around
woke up
11 p.m.
randomly
in
in the middle of the
2013,
night.
and I was
Each
walking
time,
down a dimly
I had
lit
no
street
idea
at
what
night
was
on my way
waking me
home
up.
from work. My
After it
car had
happened
been
the
in the
4th
shop,
time
so
in a
I'd been
row,
forced to
I
walk
told
3
my
miles
parents.
home every day.
They told
The
me
walk
that I
was
was
barely
going
an
through
hour,
puberty,
so I was home
and that
before
changes to my
midnight.
body are natural.
I live in a small town in southern
Next time it
Indiana,
happened,
so after
I stayed
10 there's
awake
rarely
instead
any
of falling
cars on
back
the road.
asleep.
The only vehicles
A
you
few
ever
minutes
see
after
are
I woke
truckers
up,
heading to
I heard
Indianapolis.
faint rustling noises
I was
from
about
my
a
closet.
mile into the walk.
My parents
and I
didn't
turned down a
believe
dirt
me.
road.
My dad even
My house
checked
was
my
off the
closet,
beaten path.
and there was
so I had
nothing
to
in
take
there
all these
besides
dirt
old
roads
toys and
surrounded by
posters.
forests to get there.
The next
As I was
4 days
turning,
remained the most
I heard the sound of a
traumatizing nights
motor in the
I've ever
distance.
experienced
It
in
was
my
getting
life.
closer very slowly.
I'd been woken up
I
only to
saw
hear
about a
rustling
quarter
in my
mile down the
closet.
stretch of road I just turned off of, a van moving very slowly without its lights.
It was torture.
At first, this
couldn't
didn't
take it
strike me
anymore.
as out of place.
I
due
begged
to
my
the fact
parents
that the
to
town I
believe
live
me,
in
in there is
My
a pretty
dad got
cheap
angry.
car dealership that sells
He
used
dragged me to
cars
my
and vans
closet
with
to
broken
prove there was
parts,
nothing
like
in there.
broken headlights.
He started
So I
throwing
just assumed
toys
this
around
guy
my
was one of their
room,
clients.
clearing the closet bit by
I
bit,
kept walking
yelling
down
at
the
me the
side
whole
road,
time.
the van still going
That
slowly
is,
down the
until
main
he
road.
pulled one of the posters
About 5
off the wall.
seconds later, I jumped.
My
when I
mother
heard the
and
sound of
father
the van
stared in
roar,
horror
and it
at the
sped up
massive
really
hole in
fast.
the wall the posters
Except
had
now it had its
concealed.
lights on. I was
My
startled,
mom
but
started
not
screaming,
worried.
and my
This
dad
was
pulled out a
until the van
flashlight.
got closer to the
The
turn
hole
for the
was
side
way
road.
too deep to see where it
About
led.
500 feet
So my
away
dad
from the
ran
turn.
outside
The
and
van
began
turned off its
inspecting the
lights
outside
again
of the
and slowed
house.
down.
There was
Now
a
I
tiny
was
hole in the
officially
dirt at
creeped
the
out.
base of the house.
I didn't want to
and
seem
a little
startled,
digging
so
revealed
I
that
just
it was
walked
more than a
faster down the
divot.
road.
There was literally a
I kept turning back
passageway from the
constantly
woods
to
to
see
my
if I was
room.
being followed.
My mom and I
And
were
my
out of the
suspicions
house that
became
night
reality
to my aunt's house.
as I saw the van
We
turn
moved out
onto the
shortly
dirt
after
road.
this.
I was only about 500 feet from the van, so I started to walk a lot faster. I don't like thinking about this experience. I didn't want to look back. Have to face it eventually. I did just to be safe. My parents also refused to talk about every bone in my body, and I think it's partly because they feel some blame with both the passenger and driver's doors open. Chilling to think that there was a stranger. At this point, I ran for my life down the dirt road for over a month. I heard what I'm positive was a gunshot not far away. Probably never. I really thought this was how I was going to die. Your kids come to you with something that sounds abnormal. I made a quick turn into one of the surrounding forests and hid behind a big rock. I heard what sounded like a middle-aged man not far away say, "I think she went into the woods." And then, to my horror, what sounded like 3 young girls. My name is one Leo. Of them responding, "To be completely honest, see if we can find her." I'm a little lost in life. Now I wasn't fearing for my life. Get into it too much. I was worrying I was going to be forced into whatever sick group this was. For the past 3 years, I was covering my mouth, trying not to make any sound. When I heard the man say, "Whoever finds her doesn't have to drink the blood tonight," and I feel like my hometown has nothing to offer me anymore. Is this some sort of satanic cult? I'm about to be a senior in college, and to be completely honest, will I become one of them? I have absolutely no idea what I'm going to do with my life after that. Sitting behind a rock, enough with the sob story, any sound that I could hear. I was in Berlin last year for whatever reason, probably searching for a sense of place or trying to find a direction in life. When I felt the courage to look from behind the rock, I saw red and blue lights right outside the forest. Nothing I'm not used to. I ran out screaming for help. I was getting ready to leave. Came to me and said, "Man, do you know about this body?" My apartment keys were missing. I was confused and said, "Just my luck." Then I saw in front of the cop car, began walking toward my apartment. I will ever see. The whole thing was locked up. Looked like there was no way I was getting in there. And it was way too late at night to get a replacement. There was no van in sight. I'm not sure what most people would do in a situation like this. The car, the man, my first thought was to start looking for a place to sleep. The cops said that my luck wasn't bad enough to drive me home. It started raining. Eventually, I decided to sleep under a nearby bridge. I looked out my window to see the van. I didn't even know where I was. The same one from before. I was out of the rain and safe, so I was without its lights on down my street. As I was drifting off, this time I was smart and wrote down the license voices coming from across the river. I called the cops immediately and told them what I saw and gave the license plate number. 5 men standing on the opposite side of the river, along with a little boat that was long gone. But they didn't seem to notice me. What will horrify me? It took me less than a minute to realize what I was watching. Cops said we checked the license plate. There was an honest-to-God drug dealer registered in South Dakota right in front of me. But the thing is, my German isn't great, other precincts around the country to make out what they were saying. They'd gotten reports several briefcases and duffel bags were exchanging hands. So I filled in the blanks myself. One in Nevada, one in Alaska, I thought about finding a new spot, in Texas. But I didn't want to draw attention to myself by moving. If we get any more information. I figured I'd just wait for this to be over, then leave. I never got a call. All of a sudden, I don't really believe in the paranormal. Aggressively in German, my best guess is that it was some sort of cult that used fake license plates. There was a brief moment of silence before the other guy put his hands up and began talking really quickly. I guess I'll never know. It looked like he was being set up. The other men stripped the man at gunpoint of his clothing and started confiscating his belongings. I didn't feel safe there anymore and got up slowly to move. As I did, I heard one of the men shout what roughly translates to, "My wife and I live in a normal suburb." I started normal jobs, not even turning to look at them. Next to normal neighbors. They shouted more things at me. The only words I was able to understand were, "Don't shoot." Most of us are taught by our parents. I ran until I threw up and nearly passed out due to drunken exhaustion. There was no way they'd be able to catch me. I'm not a writer, but they could have easily killed me. The last time I typed something out this long was the last paper I wrote about how I could have lost my life that night. Something happened not that long ago that no one can explain. Sometimes I feel like I'm fated to run forever. To this day. My wife Gianna and I had a normal day, and after work, we decided to go out to eat for a change, and we got back around 9. We don't stay up very late on work nights, so by 9:30, we were brushing our teeth, getting ready for bed. As she talked about 10 o'clock, we were in bed. We usually shut the lights off at 11. I honestly had a lot to read our books or watch our show. Tonight, we were watching our show. Then the phone rang. As we walked past Gianna told me not to answer it. Anyone calling at this hour can't be good news. I asked Emma if she had to go. I agreed with her. She said no. For that reason, I said I should pick it up in case it's an emergency. I went into the bathroom, so I reached over for the phone next to the bed to pick it up. But it stopped ringing before I could actually lift the receiver. That old landline was trash. The second the call stopped, the caller ID would disappear. There wasn't a way to check the call history. A few seconds after getting in the stall and sitting down, wrong number. I heard the bathroom entrance door open. A few minutes later, the phone rang again. So I grabbed the phone and looked at the screen. I didn't hear them move after entering. Said unknown number. I didn't think anything of this. Gianna and I both thought that was unusual, especially past 10 o'clock. Maybe it was someone hiding from an admin. I feel that there's a generally accepted cutoff time for phone calls. I stood up to button 9 p.m. and read the writing on the bathroom wall. I didn't pick up the phone, but right after it stopped ringing, the phone rang again. Then I heard the door Suddenly, it felt like it was an emergency. Whoever was in here, God forbid something happened to a relative. I came out of the stall, so I picked up in a hurry. As I left the bathroom, on the other end was looking at the voice of my neighbor Al. Almost like a, what the hell did I just see? He asked me if I knew that man standing out in front of my house. I asked her what was up. I said, "What are you talking about?"
Who was that standing
Told
right
me to
behind
go
you in the bathroom
outside
stall?
and hung up.
I got
I
chills.
found it insanely
I told
bizarre
her no
the
one
way
was
he'd
in the
just
stall
hang up
with me and
abruptly
to stop
like that.
fucking with me.
Gianna's
She
face
promised
when I
me
told
she
her what
wasn't.
Al just said
She
was
told
a
me
look
she
of
actually
fear.
came in second
She said,
before
"Don't
I
go
came
out there,"
because she realized
I
she
said,
did
"I'm
need
just
to
going to
go.
look out the window."
Then she saw someone else in the
Went
stall,
downstairs,
standing with
moved
their
the curtain
shoes
a bit
touching
to
the
look
back
out
of
to the
mine.
front lawn.
That's
There
how
was
close
definitely
they
no
were
one
behind me in the
standing
stall.
outside.
And she said she left
I
immediately,
opened the front door,
not wanting
and
to
then the
witness
storm
whatever
door
was
stepped
going
out
on.
to the front stoop.
I reiterated again.
I looked
I was
around
the
and
only
looked
one in
into
the
the
stall.
bushes right in front of the
However,
house.
I had heard someone come
Nobody.
in, but I never heard them
I
use
got
the
a little
bathroom.
annoyed at the
And I had
idea that
assumed they
Al
were
would
hiding
prank
from an
call us
admin.
this late on a work
That's when
night.
she told me no one
It also
went
just
near the
felt
door
a little
until
out
she
of
came
character
in
for him
seconds
to do
before
that.
I came out.
I went back to
didn't
bed
believe
and
in the
told Gianna
paranormal.
that no
This
one was
made my
out there
stomach
and Al
sick.
was probably
I
messing with
found an
us.
admin and told her about it.
She was just as
She pretty
confused
much
by
tried
that
to
as I
assure me
was.
that it didn't happen.
It just felt
that Emma
bizarre.
was probably just messing with me.
She told me to call
Emma
him,
was never
so
one
I
to take
did.
things seriously.
But it
or
rang
be
and went
serious
straight to
in general.
voicemail.
So when she
So I
looked
left
me
a
in the eyes
voicemail
with a
saying,
serious
"Hey, Al,
face,
what was
and
that
told me
call
word
about?
for word
Give
what
me a
she
call
saw,
back."
I felt like it actually
the phone
happened.
rang.
And something really
Said,
was in
"Unknown
there with
caller
me,
again."
along with the
I
fact
picked
that I
up,
heard the bathroom
and it was
door
Al
open
again,
and closed
saying
twice.
before I could even say anything.
I'm 18 now, and I haven't forgotten it
Someone's
since.
standing outside your house.
He said it in a calm, slow voice. Then he hung up. I got up and said out loud, "All right, what the hell is going on?"
This
I told
happened
Gianna
long
to
ago
wait
when
here.
I was renting a small
I went
house in the
downstairs
town that I
and
got
back
my
to the
first
window.
real big girl
I
job
looked through
at.
the curtain, and this
It was a
time I
small
saw someone
one-floor
standing
house with
right
2
at the end of our
bedrooms,
walkway
1
where it
bathroom,
met the
and
sidewalk.
just enough living space for
He had a
myself
hood over
and
his head,
occasionally hosting
effectively
some
covering
people.
his face to just
I
blackness.
had been living there for a few weeks
I was
already.
honestly shaken.
All was fine.
I opened my door
The
and said
landlord, who
outside,
I'll just call
"Can I help
Michelle,
you?"
was really friendly and
Man just stood in
understanding.
place.
I think she rented to
I
me
threatened him
because
with
she didn't
calling
want a
the
male
police.
renting out her house.
Then the house
I'll
phone
skip
rang again.
unnecessary details. and
Closed
get
the
right
front
to the
door
point.
and went to the kitchen phone.
Something very weird
This time
started
noticed
happening
the
a few
caller
weeks
ID
into
showed
living
my
there.
neighbor Al's number.
One regular work night,
I picked
I
up,
got a knock
and
at
Al
the door.
said in a much more normal voice,
I went
"Hey,
to the
just
other
got your
side and
voicemail.
said, "Who
What
is
that
it?"
about?"
And no
I
one
didn't call
responded.
you.
I didn't open it.
I was so
No one should be
confused.
knocking on my door late at
I
night.
swore to him. He just called me
It was
twice,
early the
telling
next
me about a
morning.
man outside
I had
my
finished
house.
getting ready for work.
He
and was
sounded
about
even
to
more
leave.
confused than me.
I opened my front door.
Then moments
and saw
later,
a big
he said he
post-it
doesn't
note
see
taped to
anyone
the storm
outside my
door.
house.
It said,
I
"Hello,
went back out
beautiful."
to look out the window.
I right away
The man who was
remembered the
standing
knocks on the
outside
door
my
from
house
last night.
was gone.
It was no doubt
I
the same
demanded Al
person.
tell me right
The
now
big
if this was a
question
joke.
was,
And
who
if
could
I
it
found
be?
out it was and he
I
wouldn't tell
crumpled
me,
it out
we'd
of
have a
disgust
problem.
and threw it in the trash.
Al claimed he was
hoping
telling the
and
truth.
assuming it would
He's
be a
not
one
some
and done
immature
thing.
prankster kind of guy. He's a
It was
very
that
low-key,
night when I got
respectful
another
person.
knock at the door.
I had to put him on speaker
This
so
time a
Gianna
little
could vouch
earlier,
for me that
while
I
I was
wasn't going
cooking dinner.
crazy, and that we
I
did
went
in
over to
fact
the
get
door,
2
this time
calls
not
from
saying
someone who
anything,
sounded
just
just like
listening.
him.
There was no
He did the same and
peephole
put
or
his wife
glass
on the
to
phone
look
as
through
well
to the
to
other
vouch for
side.
him.
I had no way
In
of
the end,
seeing
what
who
could he
was
really
there
say,
without
though,
opening the
except for
door.
it sounds like
And
someone
that
was
wasn't gonna
pranking
happen,
us.
as the storm door didn't
Eventually,
lock.
we got off the phone.
But this was the
but I
second
was
night in
no
a
less
row.
horrified
Now
than
I was
before.
realizing this was some kind
I
of
had to go back
stalker
downstairs
situation.
one more time to hang up
I
the
called my mom
downstairs
and dad
phone.
to ask for
So
advice.
I looked outside one
really,
more time.
They didn't even know what to say.
The man was still no
My
longer
dad,
there.
who's a retired police officer,
None of us could
said
ever
that if
figure
I
out
called
this
the cops, they
unexplainable
wouldn't really be of
situation.
any help unless they were catching the person in the act. My dad advised me to not go outside late at night for a while, don't answer the door, and if it persists, that he'd come to town and spend a few days with me. So that was the advice I followed. The next morning, the first thing I did was check the storm door for another note, and part of me died inside when I saw another note stuck to the glass. This one said, "I like to watch you." I took a picture of it with my phone and sent it to not only my family, but Michelle as well. I asked Michelle if she had any kinds of issues with certain men or any stalkers. She acted appalled and shocked when I sent her a picture of the note and told her about the knocks. She assured me that she didn't have any stalkers and that she was in a long-term relationship. Still, I wasn't entirely convinced. I left a note on the door after work that day, saying if you're looking for Michelle, she does not live here. She only rents this house out. If you continue to come here, I will be reporting this to the police. Doing this gave me a level of comfort, actually. I thought this would end things. That night, every waking minute was spent with anxiety, worrying about hearing knocks at the door again. To my relief, there were none tonight. I went to sleep in relative peace, thinking my note worked. The next morning, I opened the door and removed my note from the glass, but then realized it wasn't my note. It was a new note, and it said, "I'm not looking for Michelle, I'm looking for you." And then it said my name, followed with, "I like watching you," like it said in the previous note. I sent it to my dad right away. I felt seriously ill. My dad packed a bag and drove up first thing. He was at my house by the time I got home from work. and work that day was rough because I couldn't think of anything except for this horrific situation. I even wondered if someone in my office could have been doing this, like this creepy guy Fernando. My dad and I waited to call the police together until later in the night when we figured whoever was doing this may be hiding out there already. We wanted them to see the police presence. We spoke with an officer outside. My dad said it must have been a busy night since they only sent one. My dad, being a retired police officer, obviously didn't hurt in this whole situation. After the officer left with his report, my dad stayed out on the front stoop for hours, even after I went to sleep. Obviously, the person didn't return that night, and I moved out once I was able to pack all my things. Michelle was completely understanding. Thankfully, whoever was stalking me at that house didn't follow me to my new place, likely eliminating the possibility that it was a coworker. So I will likely never know who it was.
I'll be honest with you, I've probably spent more time chasing women than I'd like to admit. I've had to tone it down a lot since college, partly because of what I'm about to tell you. I went to school in California, and while I haven't been back in a while, when I was there, the culture was very open. And when I say open, I mean sexual. This honestly could have been true for other colleges in other states at the time, but I really wouldn't know. It was my sophomore year, and I had just finished pledging the fraternity Pike. About halfway through the semester, though, I was getting sick of only talking to sorority girls that seemed to know half the guys in every frat. It was honestly a little gross, and I started developing a fear that every girl I was interested in had been with several people I personally knew. I tried my luck and created a Tinder profile. It wasn't long before I matched with someone whose interests seemed to match mine. We started talking, and things were going well. After a few days, we made plans to meet up at a local college bar called Tap House on a Saturday night. This was actually my favorite bar in the area because it had pool tables and I had been clearing racks since I was 10 years old. I remember getting there a little early so I could secure a table and warm my muscles up a bit. An hour passed though, and I came to terms with the fact that I had probably been stood up. I was trying to decide whether I should salvage the night or just go home and play online chess when I got a notification. To my surprise, it was Yamel, the girl I was waiting on, telling me she had just arrived. I greeted her, and she apologized for being late. We got some drinks, played some pool, and got to know each other. She was Latina and a heavy drinker, so I got plastered just trying to keep up. At one point, she asked for my Instagram, which I gave to her. 10 seconds later, I found myself staring at a collection of explicit photos she had just sent me. I was confused, but in my drunken state, I wasn't going to complain. Before I could even respond, she told me, "Your turn," which I figured could only mean one thing. Honestly, if I hadn't been so drunk, I probably would have questioned why we were sending pictures to each other when we were literally 5 feet apart, but I didn't have the foresight. I complied with her request. We laughed about the whole thing, and that was that. A few hours later, things at the bar were starting to wind down. I was planning on inviting her to my place, but she beat me to it, asking if I could spend the night at hers. I agreed, and we left the bar. I couldn't even walk in a straight line. It was honestly embarrassing. We Ubered to her apartment, which was actually in Oakland, something I hadn't realized before. Honestly, red flags should have been going off in my brain the moment we crossed into Oakland. She unlocked the door of her apartment and stepped aside so I could go first. I took a few steps inside and heard the door shut behind me. It was pitch black in there. As I was turning around to ask her to flip some lights on, the room lit up. To my horror, I wasn't facing a harmless 5'2" girl anymore. Instead, 2 massive bald dudes with tank tops were standing in front of the door with their hands clasped. I turned around, and there was another white bald dude in front of me. I wish I could tell you more about the room I was in, but it was honestly difficult for me to recall small details of that night. I couldn't fight or flee, so I just froze. The guy in front of me began telling me my own name, birthday, and age. He then went on to say that the girl I had just gone out with was 17, meaning I had received and sent explicit pictures to a minor. He then suggested that I do what I was told, which I did. The 2 guys behind me confiscated my phone, wallet, and keys, all of which I gave up without a fight. I asked the guy in front of me what he wanted, and he basically told me that he was a major distributor of illicit substances in Northern California.
He told me that I'd be outed as a pedophile if I didn't distribute his product to my fraternity and university. I wish I could remember more specifics. The two men behind me then gave me a piece of paper and told me to write down my address, followed by a list of names and numbers for as many students as I knew. I told them that I'd need my phone to complete the list, so one of them held it firmly in front of me and let me scroll through. All three of them were hovering over me now, knowing I was basically checkmated. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but the literal second I saw a chance, I ran. I was too drunk to think about the consequences of those pictures on my phone. I narrowly escaped out the door I had entered from and ran as fast as I possibly could. It's not like I was safe though. I was still smack dab in one of the most dangerous places in America. Eventually, I found a nice looking house and begged them to open up. I pleaded with them to let me use their phone and call 911, and then I told the police everything. But of course, I didn't remember the address of that girl's apartment. An officer picked me up and took down a report before asking me if I would be okay leading them back to that apartment. I was actually able to retrace the way I had run, and I waited in one of the squad cars as the police barged in. After a few minutes, an officer told me that the place was completely deserted and there were not any signs that people had even been there. In the following weeks, the police actually took my report seriously and launched a full-scale investigation. They concluded that it was probably gang-related, but were never able to arrest anyone. That was years ago. I bet this incident has been swept under the rug of Oakland's rampant crime and drug-related activity. In all honesty, what happened to me all those years ago is probably nowhere near the top of the list when it comes to that godforsaken place. I haven't used a dating app since. I've been smoking cigarettes every day for years. Before you judge me, let me just say that I recently started seeing a therapist for my nicotine addiction. Unfortunately, it hasn't helped much. The only thing worse than my nicotine addiction is my sleep schedule. I don't know what it is. I find myself staying up hours past midnight and rarely get out of bed before noon. While I'm trying to fix these parts of my life, they're extremely relevant to what I'm about to tell you. It began a few months ago. I was standing on my balcony, like I do most nights, smoking a cigarette. I live in a really secluded neighborhood. It's not like the houses around here are right next to each other. Despite this, I have a neighbor whose fence I can see over if I'm standing on my balcony. I'm not nosy or anything, but this particular night, I was looking into his yard. I had never met the guy, but I assumed he lived alone since there was only ever a navy blue BMW parked in his driveway. But not this night, though. There was a black van I'd never seen before sitting in front of his house. I didn't make anything of it, just noting the coincidence to myself. The next night, though, I made it a point to pay attention to his yard, and the same black van was parked there again. I didn't assume something sinister was going on. I was more intrigued than anything. The following morning, I went up to my balcony and looked into his yard. The van was gone. For the remainder of the week, I made a game out of observing the van at night, theorizing its purpose. I said I wasn't nosy, but I sure am obsessive. It's actually the main reason most of my friends drifted out of my life. I wasn't going to do more than observe, though. It wasn't my business or place to poke around further. That is, until one night, when I saw something that completely changed my perspective of the situation. I was up later than usual. It was maybe 5 in the morning. The van was there, as it had been the past several nights. I was smoking my last cigarette when my neighbor actually walked outside, something I hadn't seen yet. I watched as he made his way to the van, carrying what appeared to be a long black bag. It almost looked like a set of golf clubs, only much heavier. After opening the van's sliding door, he delicately placed the bag inside. He promptly got in the driver's seat and sped off. I was dumbfounded. I had absolutely no idea what he could have been carrying. I was exhausted though, so I figured I'd think about it more the next morning. The next day, I decided that I'd go out on my balcony a little earlier and wait for the van to arrive at his house. I brought my laptop up there so I could get some work done and wait. It was around 10 p.m. and the van wasn't in the driveway, but around 1 a.m. the van pulled in. I quickly shut my laptop and watched. Nothing happened for a good several minutes, like the van just sat there, engine running and all. After about 5 minutes, the driver door opened and there he was. I watched as he went around to the side of the van, then slid the door open and pulled out the same bag that he had put in the night before. He seemed to be struggling this time around, visibly trying not to crack under the weight of whatever was in there. After waddling a few slow steps, both he and the bag disappeared into his house. I didn't know what to think. I thought about waiting there until 5 a.m. again, but that would be far too taxing on my brain. Something was definitely wrong though, and I was determined to find out what. The next morning, I flipped a coin and ultimately decided to follow his van when he pulled out that night. After a pretty unproductive day, I went up to my balcony around 4 a.m. and waited, cigarette in hand. As soon as I saw movement in his driveway, I rushed downstairs, grabbed my keys, and got in my car. I turned my headlights off and waited for the van to turn onto the main road. Once it did, I began tailing it. After 20 minutes of driving, he pulled onto a dirt path that looked like it led into the woods. It did. I followed, and the woods actually started thinning up a bit. It seemed like this path had once been a main road or something. We drove for another few minutes before I realized what his destination was. There was a deserted gas station literally tucked away in some clearing in the woods, and right in front of it was the BMW I'd always seen parked in his driveway. I feared I was getting too close, so I turned my car around and parked across the street from the dirt road. I must have waited there an hour. His BMW finally pulled out of the clearing. Nervously, I started driving back up the path, not sure what I'd find. I pulled over on the side of the road and started walking towards the gas station. It was eerie. The front door was locked. I walked around to the side. That was locked as well. So was the back door. I needed to know what was inside. There was a row of windows that I tried to open, but none of them would budge. Against my better judgment, I picked up a rock and slammed it into one of the windows. It shattered pretty easily, but there must have been a security system in that place because alarm bells started blaring. I sprinted back to my car, the whole time wondering why an abandoned gas station would be rigged with an alarm system. As I sped out of there, I called 911 and gave them a vague description before hanging up. I got back to my house and ran inside, my heart still racing. The next morning, I woke up hoping the whole thing had blown over. Boy, was I wrong. I went up to my balcony to see like 8 police cars in my neighbor's driveway, lights flashing and everything. I watched as an officer escorted my neighbor out of his house in handcuffs. One by one, the police cars drove away and I was left to my imagination. I lit a cigarette and stood there, finally alone with my thoughts. I've asked the police for details on several occasions, but they would never answer my questions. I've even tried driving back up to that gas station, but the whole road had been blocked off. Maybe one day I'll work up the courage to walk through the woods and go looking for answers.
I'm not somebody who grew up with any kind of sleep disorders such as sleep paralysis or night terrors. I've always been a very heavy sleeper, so that's why when what I'm about to tell you started happening, it was a shock to me. We all have the occasional nightmare. I used to call nightmares a free, 3D immersive horror movie. To most, that will probably sound freakish, but in a weird way, I sometimes like the thrill of waking up after a nightmare. I was living with my one roommate, Patricia. I just called her Trish. We had very different schedules with work, so we didn't see each other much besides on the weekends. This happened in July. I remember because it was so hot out that I had the window AC unit on full blast every night, which also provided a white noise that helped me sleep better. It was the first night that I had the nightmare, a few days after my ex and I had broken up and life wasn't exactly the best. I had a dream that I vaguely remember for the most part, but the part that I vividly remember is being in a room full of my family members sitting quietly around a dinner table, and standing across the table from me was what I could best describe to be a creature that looked like one of the aliens from the movie Science, only with horns and claws. It looked like what you'd imagine a sleep paralysis demon to look like, only I was still fully asleep and dreaming. The next thing I knew, the thing was standing next to me, looking down at me. I started to run away in my dream until I was in my room, or I guess my brain's version of my room. That was the last of that dream I remember before waking up. My room was pitch black and the AC fan was on full blast. My heart was racing a bit from the dream, and I sat there thinking, wow, that was a creepy dream. I looked around the room naturally before laying back down and going to sleep. The following night, I woke up in the middle of the night to my bedroom door open, which I usually 99% of the time would leave shut unless I was drinking. My immediate thought was that it was Trish checking if I was home. I went up to go shut it and went back to sleep fairly quickly. I asked Trish if she came in my room the next day via text, and she told me she did not. So it was always possible I just took a midnight trip to the bathroom or kitchen that I didn't remember. It was the following night that I had another nightmare. That same demon creature from my previous dream appeared again in this one. This one was a lot more disturbing. Instead of being with my family, I was in a dark, square, empty room with the thing, and it kept getting closer to me. Oddly, I don't remember the thing actually moving its limbs to walk. I just remember that it kept getting closer and closer until it was on top of me. And then, like I couldn't even move, the thing took a claw to my thigh and scratched me, and I actually think I felt the pain in my dream. Then, the next thing I remember is waking up. I don't mean I woke up right after that. I mean I don't remember what happened after that in the dream. But it was dark in the room once again, AC on full blast. I felt a slight stinging feeling on my upper thigh. I felt it with my hand, and I actually felt like I felt something on the skin. I rushed to the bathroom and looked in the mirror, and I screamed out loud when I saw a gash in my thigh. I went to Trish's room and turned on the light, waking her up. She asked how the fuck I got that, and I screamed I don't know. We went to my room together and flipped off all the sheets and covers off the bed, looking for any kinds of bugs or spiders or any sharp object I could have laid down on, which, yes, I understand makes no sense, but what else were we to think? Trish then looked at me and said, "Wait," and put her finger to her lip. She turned off my AC unit, and for the first time in days, the room went quiet. It all became sickeningly clear in an instant, as we both heard a sound from under my bed. The kind of faint sound that you sense from another person just existing in the room. I'm impressed at both of our ability to not scream right on the spot as we both looked at the bed and then at each other, and then left the room and then the apartment. We knocked on the neighboring apartment door until he answered. We asked him for help. Someone was in our apartment. He was an older guy, so I don't think we expected him to go fight some stranger in our apartment. He let us use his phone to call 911. At some point while waiting for the police, we heard a door outside slam shut. It sounded like our door. None of us could look out the window in time to see who it was. When the police got there, we confirmed the intruder was gone. We did leave all the lights on in the apartment when we ran away though, and left in a rather sudden fashion, so the intruder definitely knew that we knew. And then came the reflection I had of my dreams, and what they actually meant. That demon in my dreams was supposed to be him, even in the first dream. And with my door being open that night, that means he or she may have been roaming around our apartment at night, possibly eating our food. And to think this person actually scratched my thigh so hard it left a mark, it's actually really disturbing to think about. This forever changed my outlook on dreams and nightmares. This happened when I was a little kid living in our old house in Suffolk County, Long Island. I'm gonna say I was about 6 or 7 years old. My older brother and I shared a bedroom on the top floor that used to be a separate apartment that my dad rented out to an old lady, but she moved out, and so the upstairs was mainly for my older brother and I at that point. The layout was as follows. At the top of the stairs, on the left was our bedroom, which used to be the old woman's living room. Straight ahead was the bathroom, and to the right was an extra kitchen and a small bedroom. We had a million toys in our room, as the room itself was huge, and it also had 2 parallel crawl-in closets on opposite sides of the room where we stored a million other toys and board games and stuff like that. There was one toy though, a race car with a bunch of buttons on it. The buttons would make the car's lights turn on momentarily and play varying sound effects such as honking, revving, and driving sounds, and a little rock song. It was a toy we had for like ever, because it was originally a gift from my brother when he was a little younger. It was a random night. My brother and I were both in bed, not yet asleep, when suddenly, like a jump scare from a scary movie, the loud revving sound of that car toy suddenly activated, along with the lights of the car in the middle of the room. I looked at the car and instantly got scared and accused my brother Luke of doing that to scare me. He was laughing hysterically, saying he didn't do it. I was completely terrified. The toy then stopped making noises and went quiet. I was extremely unsettled, as any little kid would be, but nevertheless, time marched on and I fell asleep. It wasn't for a while until something else happened. One night, when Luke and I were both in bed again, we both heard a weird thud in the room. Luke insisted on trying to creep me out, saying there was a ghost in the room or something, and I kept yelling at him to shut up or I'd get Mom. He kept laughing until we both noticed a light in the corner of the room. It was the toy car again. I got out from the bed and ran straight down the stairs yelling for my mom. I got to my parents' room and yelled there's something in our room. I'm sure I gave a little 7-year-old spiel about how there's a ghost in the room, hearing a thud and the lights on the toy car turning on. Luke entered the room, and my mom defaulted to telling him to knock it off if he's trying to scare me. He said how could he turn the lights of the car on from his bed? I slept in my parents' room that night because I was too scared to sleep upstairs. It was a long while after that night and nothing happened. Not until one night. Luke was not in the room. My guess is he was having a sleepover with one of his many friends. I was sleeping in the room by myself that night. I had long since tucked that car away in the small bedroom across the hall because it freaked me out. After my mom kissed me goodnight, I asked her to keep the door open since I was always scared when I was alone in the room. I rolled on my side and tried to go to sleep. But being that I was scared of being alone, I had a hard time getting tired that night. I felt wide awake. Then, there was a sound I can't explain that came from down the hall. I flipped over to face the door, and the toy car rolled into the room with its lights on. I let out a scream straight from the bottom of my stomach as I cried for my mom and pressed my body up against the wall. Moments later, my parents both came up the stairs into the room, noticing the car on the floor. I screamed that someone pushed the car into the room. My dad went to go check the other rooms, but said there was no one there. There weren't any places to hide up there besides the closets and under the beds, and my dad checked all of them. I don't know what my parents thought in that moment. On one hand, they probably thought the toy was malfunctioning or it's just my imagination. But on the other hand, I think they were also slightly freaked out. That toy car didn't have a feature to move on its own. My dad smashed the toy and threw it in the neighbor's trash to make me feel better. I slept in their room for a while until my dad forced me back upstairs eventually. This story is the reason why I believe in the paranormal and something after death. I used to go bowling quite often with my friends when I was young. I'm talking like 12, 13. There was a bowling alley down the block from my friends and I, and so we'd go there on weekends. The bowling alley has been closed for years, but when it was open, it was super cheap and affordable, perfect for a bunch of young teenagers who didn't have money of their own. This one weekend, I went with my friends Jacob, Josh, and Mikey to the bowling alley. We always went at night. It was likely around 8 p.m. The bowling alley was always crowded on the weekends, and sometimes we'd see familiar faces. There was this older man who would sometimes be there alone, bowling on the adult side of the bowling alley where alcohol was served. We always played on the non-alcoholic side. How we took notice to that man was because he'd sometimes just weirdly walk down the entire bowling alley, passing every lane, watching people bowling. Then we'd notice him end up back at his lane all by himself. We nicknamed him Creeper Bob after maybe the third time seeing him. Tonight there was a lane open next to us, and guess who out of nowhere sat next to us? Bob, or whatever his real name was, but I'll keep referring to him as Bob. He was setting up a game on the lane next to us by himself, and it wasn't long until he started trying to talk to us. He started making comments on our form, and every so often interrupting our conversation to tell us weird things like how long he's been coming here. Then eventually he said something really weird, that he watches us play every weekend from across the bowling alley, and he decided to come over and introduce himself tonight. He played it off like he was trying to be some kind of bowling teacher to us, but really it was just annoying and most of all uncomfortable. Bob at one point entered our lane as I was up to bowl, and he grabbed my wrist with his hands to position me into an allegedly better form. I never gave him permission to touch me, nor did I ask for his guidance. We were only like 13 though. None of us stood up and said, "Yo, get lost," or something like that. I could just feel the unease amongst my friends. Every moment of that man touching me, I felt more and more disgusted. We cut our night at the bowling alley short because of him. We used the money that we would have used on more games on getting pizza instead at a pizza place further out the block. When we came out, Jacob and Mikey went their own way since they lived on a different block. Josh and I walked back down the other way in the direction of our houses. As we did, the sound of a car engine starting made us turn around. We noticed an old SUV like a Ford Explorer banging a three-point turn. We both imagined the possibility of it being Creeper Bob. The SUV started slowly tailing us as we walked down the street, so we picked up our pace. Then the SUV pulled up right alongside us, and the window rolled down. It was in fact the man from the bowling alley. He said out the window that he could offer us a ride home. We said no thanks. He replied it's not safe for a couple kids to be walking around late at night. We weren't even really that young. We were young teenagers, not little kids, and it was crazy that he thought we were young enough to trick into getting into a car. When we made it clear we weren't getting in, he pulled to the side of the road and parked his car. Josh and I decided to start jogging home. When we reached the intersection where we'd split off, we said bye and I continued jogging home. By the time I made it back, I was out of breath. Running after eating pizza is not a good idea. My dad was already asleep because he worked weekends. My mom was out with her girlfriends most likely, and the same was probably the case with my sister, so I wasn't supposed to ring the bell because my dad didn't want to be woken up. I went around back to get the key we had for the back door, which was hidden in the shed. When I got out from the shed, I thought I heard something, and I should have listened to my gut. I went to the back door to unlock it, and as I opened the door, I heard the sound of someone running up behind me. Before I could fully turn around, someone pushed me inside the house, covering my mouth and wrapping their arm around my neck. I wasn't able to see who it was because I couldn't turn my head. I scratched and clawed at the man's hand until I could move my mouth just enough out of the grip of his hand and scream, "Dad." I may have only been 13, but I was able to put up enough of a fight to get him to lose his grip a few times, allowing me to scream. This undoubtedly scared him off as he finally let go for good and ran outside. I didn't look back. I ran up the half flight of stairs to the main floor and yelled for my dad. My dad came rushing out of his room, and after telling him what just happened, he checked the backyard and all around the property and then came back inside. I told him about the man from the bowling alley, how we nicknamed him Creeper Bob, how he followed Josh and I in his SUV after admitting to stalking us at the bowling alley. My dad filed a police report and tried getting the bowling alley to release the video surveillance from that night, but they refused. I was never allowed to go back there after my mom found out about this. Not that I'd ever want to. The crazy thing is, technically I can't say with 100% certainty that the man who came in behind me and grabbed me was the man from the bowling alley. But realistically, how slim are the chances that it wasn't him? When I was a teenager, my close group of friends were, I guess, what you'd call delinquents. We liked causing trouble, breaking rules, and messing around in places we didn't belong. I grew up in a suburb in northern New Jersey, so I guess you could say we were just spoiled kids with nothing better to do. Looking back, the way we passed the time was a little silly, but there's nothing I can do about that now. Anyway, one of the things we really liked to do was to go exploring in the late hours of the night. Usually we explored abandoned buildings, but not always. We actually got banned from our middle school after jumping through an open window, but that's a story for another time. This particular night, we were planning on executing a riskier task. There were 5 of us: me, Chip, Jason, Rowan, and Anish. Rowan had a tendency to bounce around from job to job, which was kind of a running joke in our squad. He'd lose jobs as quickly as he'd get them, usually for the dumbest reasons you can imagine. He had just picked up a gig as an attendant at a bowling alley a few towns over from us. I'm sure you could see where this is going. He had been entrusted the key to close up the place the night before. Anish was a master of persuasion, and he somehow convinced Rowan to let us explore the bowling alley at like 3 a.m. I'm telling you, Anish could convince someone to give them their kidney. That's how persistent he was. I haven't heard from him in a while. I think he might actually be in jail right now. Anyway, the 5 of us agreed to get a little drunk before going. We all had a substantial amount to drink except for Jason, who refused to go anywhere unless he was the one driving. His dad had a really nice BMW, and Jason liked being able to end our links when he got tired. After getting a little buzzed, James drove the 5 of us to the location. I was the heavy drinker of the squad. It's not something I'm proud of, but it's just who I was at that point in my life. Because of this, I usually took things a little less seriously than I should have, especially when it came to dangerous or risky situations. Rowan unlocked the door, and the 5 of us made our way inside. Chip was usually the most cautious, and he kept chiding us to be careful in his hilariously high-pitched voice. Rowan told us we couldn't actually do any bowling right now, which we were all a little upset about. I had the genius idea of doing some makeshift sliding on the lanes as if they were slip-and-slides. Since we were drunk, this was actually pretty fun. The 5 of us soon tired ourselves out and decided we wanted to do some exploring. We asked Rowan if there were any back rooms we could check out, and he told us there were. We made our way into the employee-only area, and Rowan led us to some kind of storage room. We started poking around and flipping things over, just being stupid and careless. We figured Rowan was going to get fired anyway, so we weren't too concerned with messing things up. As we started getting bored, we heard a deafening bump from below us. The 5 of us froze, staring at each other. Jason, the only sober one in the group, asked if the place had a basement. Rowan looked just as shocked as we were, and told that he had no prior knowledge of a potential basement. Anish grinned, eager to continue exploring. Chip seemed really nervous, telling us that we were probably going to end up getting Rowan fired. We were whispering now, arguing whether we wanted to go look for this hypothetical basement. Just then, Jason lifted the edge of a rug nestled in the corner, revealing a hatch. We were shocked. The atmosphere in the room instantly shifted with the realization that the situation was now serious. Even if we had found the way into the basement, the sound we heard was still unexplained. I don't think any of us really wanted to go down there, but Jason made the first move in his classic level-headed style. He flung the latch open and stared down at the old, rusted ladder leading into the darkness. "Screw this," whispered Chip, motioning for us to leave. Jason ignored him and went for the stairs. He pulled out his phone and shined the flashlight into the blackness. Without another word, he descended into the abyss. I could tell Rowan, Anish, and Chip were a little scared, understandably. I still had a lot of liquid confidence, so I decided I'd go next. Anish followed behind me and Rowan brought up the rear. Chip refused to come down with us. The 4 of us pulled out our phone flashlights and began exploring the basement that had been hidden for some reason. It was filled with dust and cardboard boxes, stacked up to the ceiling. There was nothing else down there, or at least that's what we originally thought. Anish noticed a door in the corner, and we walked over to it. Jason put his hand on the handle, but a split second before he was going to open it, we heard a distinctive bump come from the other side, which sounded identical to the one we heard earlier. We looked around at each other, with horrified looks on our faces. I could tell we were all thinking the same thing. An animal, maybe? No shot, it was too loud to be an animal. I was pretty freaked out at this point and turned away to leave. Like an idiot, Jason cracked the door open, revealing another storage room. That's not all that was in there, though. In the corner of the room, there was a human figure sitting on the ground with its legs crossed, facing away from us. We were frozen in place, utterly terrified. After a full minute of stagnance, the person in the corner of the room banged their head against the wall, explaining the sounds we had been hearing. I began tiptoeing to the ladder, careful not to make any noise. The rest of my friends turned around and began doing the same, clearly filled with terror. Just then, Rowan tripped on a piece of junk on the floor and then cursed. The person in the room yelled and we ran. Jason and I were up the ladder in a split second, with Anish close behind. Chip was leaned over the hatch, concerned with what he was hearing. Anish made it up and the 3 of us ran out of the room. We heard Rowan scream, "Get off me!" but Anish and Jason were too terrified to turn back. I ran back into the room and saw Chip chucking a metal pipe down the hatch, which was followed by a demonic scream. Rowan scrambled on the ladder and Chip grabbed his wrist, yanking him up. Rowan ran toward me while Chip slammed the hatch shut. The 5 of us sprinted out of the bowling alley, and Rowan hastily locked the door with trembling hands. Jason drove us back with a blank look on his face. We listened as Rowan described what happened after the rest of us made it up the ladder. Apparently, whoever had been in the basement jumped on Rowan's back, clawing at him. Chip came to his rescue and nailed Rowan's attacker in the head with that pipe, causing the lunatic to fall backward. Rowan said he only saw the guy's face for a split second. It was the horrifying face of a dirty, old, homeless-looking guy with a bird's nest of hair on his head. Rowan ended up quitting the next day without giving his boss an explanation, as it was definitely illegal what we had done. To this day, we have no idea how that guy could have gotten down there. Maybe there was an alternate entrance we had overlooked. Either way, the basement had been intentionally hidden, which tells me that Rowan's boss might have known something about the whole thing. This experience ruined my taste for bowling, which I have not done since. One night, my girlfriend Rebecca and I decided it would be fun to go bowling. We drove to the closest bowling alley and went through the whole process of renting shoes, finding balls, and picking a lane. We both were really bad. Neither of us had been bowling in many years. We paid for an hour of bowling. Rebecca wasn't really enjoying it too much because she kept getting gutter balls. I was doing better than her, but not by much, so I wasn't really able to help her out much. And then to make matters even worse, Rebecca's ex-boyfriend arrived with his group of friends and they started bowling a few lanes down from us. Rebecca looked away, refusing to even look in that direction, whispering at me that we need to leave now. We packed it up early and left. She went to the car and waited while I returned the shoes. I think her ex spotted me while I was at the front counter, and I looked away. I didn't tell Rebecca this though. We went home and agreed to play Wii bowling instead and have some wine. That sounded much more fun anyway. When we got home, the first thing I did was turn on the Wii and open a bottle of wine. The bowling alley trip was a failure, but I didn't want Rebecca to be unhappy. We played Wii bowling for like half an hour with music on in the background and drinking wine. It turned out to be much more fun than the bowling alley. Until the current song that was playing ended, and we heard something come from upstairs in that brief moment of silence. Rebecca and I looked at each other, telling me she heard it too. I turned off the music for good, but now there was just silence. The sound we heard could best be described as a heavy object being dropped on the floor. I went upstairs to investigate. I checked every bedroom with the lights on. I checked under every bed. I was relieved to find nothing. I wasn't actually expecting to find someone in the house, but naturally you do need to go investigate if you hear a suspicious sound in your house. Still, I wondered what actually made the sound because I didn't find anything on the floor. After maybe another half an hour of playing Wii bowling, we brought our little wine party upstairs to the bedroom, and eventually we fell asleep. Rebecca's a lightweight, so she got much drunker than me, which explains why I was the one to wake up in the middle of the night and not her. I heard what woke me up though. It was another clear and distinct sound of something heavy being dropped from above. But the only thing is, now we were upstairs, and yet the sound still came from above. So what else would be above us? The attic. The attic door is right outside my bedroom door. It's one of those doors with a string that you pull down and a metal ladder comes down. I tiptoed out of the bedroom to not wake up Rebecca. I stood under the attic door and listened. Every 5 seconds or so, I heard the slightest creaking sound, like from the weight of something moving around. I didn't want to scare Rebecca, but I'd heard of animals getting into people's attics sometimes. I went to get a broom from the closet to use as a possible weapon if I were to have to fend off an animal. Then I quietly pulled the attic door open and climbed up. I stopped at the top of the ladder in the darkness and listened. I heard creaking. It was the creaking of the wooden rocking chair we had up there. I used my phone as a light to reveal the rocking chair. There was someone sitting in it, slowly rocking. I nearly fell off the ladder. I wanted to go run back to Rebecca and hide. I wanted to do anything but approach this person. But I gathered the courage to yell, "Who are you?" The rocking stopped, and the man turned around to look at me. He started making this animalistic, gargling, growling sound. Then he got up, and that's when I hurried down the ladder and pushed the attic door up. I screamed for Rebecca to call the cops until I heard her acknowledge me. I stayed under the attic door, preventing it from being opened as the man in the attic tried kicking the door open. He eventually stopped, and I heard the deranged laughter of a sick, mentally ill person. He spoke in another language. It sounded Russian. I felt like my arms were going to fall off, holding up the attic door, waiting for the police. When they finally arrived, Rebecca went downstairs to let them in. From here, it was the job of the police officers to go up there and remove the man. Rebecca and I waited in the living room, sitting on the couch next to each other, until we saw them bringing the man out through the living room to the front door in handcuffs. The way the man looked at me said everything. He was a dangerous, mentally ill person. His stare was full of hatred and craziness, with a hint of confusion. His lip contorted in this bizarre way that would almost make you think he were drunk. Whatever happened with him, we don't know. We didn't press civil charges, but I'm sure he was charged criminally if they didn't deem him to be insane. This happened in the summertime when we keep the windows open, and so it was most likely that he squeezed through one of the windows in the backyard. I'm not sure why he picked our house. We may just have been the unlucky house he stumbled across. I once worked as a direct care aide for a 65-year-old woman with a developmental disability. Her daughter, who was in her 40s, worked overnights, and she needed a caretaker with medical experience to watch her overnight. When I say once worked for them, I mean I literally worked once, just this night, and you're about to hear why I never went back. The 65-year-old woman's name was Martha. Her daughter's name, who contacted me, was named Colleen. It's possible Colleen didn't have any other family to watch her and didn't want to or couldn't afford to put Martha in a nursing home. Or it was possible that she felt more comfortable hiring somebody with some form of experience to watch over her. At the time, I was already a direct care worker for 2 other women who suffered some forms of developmental disabilities, so I had experience. But nothing prepared me for that night. Colleen left for work. Earlier that day, I worked my first job, so I was really pushing my body to exhaustion, trying to make as much money as possible. Colleen had introduced Martha and I. Martha had given me a smile before Colleen brought her upstairs to her bedroom for the night. It was around 9 p.m. Colleen told me that Martha would sometimes walk around the house at night acting confused, and I'd need to calm her down and bring her back to her room. She specifically addressed this not to be a form of sleepwalking when I asked. She said it's one of the symptoms of her mother's dementia. I told her to rest assured that I'd know how to handle it. I spent my time initially in the living room catching up on my show. These jobs aren't super glamorous, and for the most part, it is a lot of sitting around. I heard footsteps from upstairs. I went to the stairway and looked up the stairs, then called Martha's name asking if she needed anything. She didn't answer. I heard her footsteps go back to her room, and then the door closed. Maybe she went to the bathroom. I went back to the living room and watched some more TV. It was maybe an hour later that I got up to grab my sandwich that I brought from the fridge. As I left the kitchen with a plate and my sandwich to go back to the couch, I nearly had a heart attack and dropped the plate when I saw Martha standing at the doorway. Glass shattered everywhere. I apologized to her and asked if she was okay. She started yelling at me, "Who are you?" I reminded her who I am. I'm her direct care worker here to make sure she's okay. Everything she said at this point was in a loud scream. "Why are you here? I don't know you," things of that nature. I reminded her that we had just met and that her mother Colleen hired me to watch her and the house. This seemed to work for long enough for me to get her to come back upstairs with me and to her room. I brought her up a glass of water and some melatonin and clonazepam. I made sure she took both before going back downstairs. After a few hours, I was absolutely exhausted. I had to get a couple hours of shut-eye. There was a spare bedroom upstairs with a twin-size bed where Colleen said I could rest if needed. I felt like at this point Martha was asleep for the night from the melatonin. I fell asleep within minutes, but I was asleep for only maybe an hour. I woke up to a sound from downstairs. It was this repeated slamming. Every 1 to 2 seconds, something from downstairs was being slammed. I jumped out of the bed. I had left the bedroom door open so that I'd hear anything if Martha got up, case in point right here. When I got to the stairs, I realized the slamming was coming from the kitchen. I walked down the stairs in as quick of a speed as I could while still remaining quiet. Getting to the bottom, I peered around the opening to the kitchen, and what I saw was like a scene from a scary movie I'd seen before. I saw Martha in the darkness, standing in front of the oven, repeatedly opening it and slamming it shut. It was horrifying. When I say I saw Martha, I really only saw her silhouette. It was that dark in the kitchen. I said Martha really loudly, and she stopped, turned to her left at me, shut the oven door one final time, and started walking towards me, towards the stairs. I said in a now softer, kind of scared sounding voice, "Are you okay?" She got close enough to me where I could now see her facial features, and she looked at me with this blank expression, then walked right past me and started walking up the stairs. I followed her upstairs, but as soon as she got to her room, she slammed her door shut. I knocked on the door saying, "Martha, are you alright?" She didn't respond. I quietly opened the door just to peek inside, and I saw Martha at the side of her bed, just standing facing the wall. I've seen a lot, but this was some pretty unsettling behavior that I feel like is the exact kind of stuff you'd see in some scary movies, like I mentioned before. I walked over to her and gently eased her into the bed. When she was laying down, I covered her, and for what I was hoping would be the final time, I said "Goodnight, Martha," and shut her door. I went across the upstairs to the spare room and went back to bed. I purposely tried not to fall asleep for at least half an hour just in case she'd wake up again, but I don't even know if I made it that long. All I know is I fell asleep pretty freaking quickly. I woke up once again, however much later. The room was still pitch black, and the 1-hour alarm I set had not yet gone off. I looked around the room, wondering what woke me up. I didn't see what it was until I heard a sound from inside the closet. I then noticed the cracked open closet door, and the black shadow of a head peeking out of the closet. Again, I almost had a heart attack. I said, "Martha." She didn't answer. I kept saying Martha a bunch of times until she pushed the door open, and I saw her approaching the bed slowly. She started saying what she was saying hours ago again. "Who are you? I don't know you." As she got closer, I tried calming her down, reminding her who I am. I reached for the lamp next to the bed and fumbled with it until it turned on. Martha was holding a huge kitchen knife in her hand. At this moment, everything changed. Martha was now a threat to my life, and I had to worry about myself, not her. I screamed at this point, "Martha, put the knife down." I guess my scream stressed her out because she got closer and started screaming back at me, still repeating, "I don't know you." I wasn't going to attempt to calm down a knife-wielding dementia patient. That was not in any job description. I mapped out a way to run around her in the bedroom, and I went for it. I jumped off the bed on the side further from her, and she screamed again, "Who are you?" She swung the knife at the air as I ran past her. It was a slow and weak swipe from what I saw, but nonetheless showed that she had intentions of actually using it. I got downstairs and grabbed my shoes and went outside. Instead of calling 911, I called Colleen as she requested I do if there's an issue. I was courteous in doing this because getting law enforcement involved is never doing anyone any favors. Colleen was yelling into the phone at me not to leave her, and honestly I yelled back that she attempted to kill me and that I didn't call the police. She had to leave work, of course. I stayed outside of the house, making sure Martha didn't go anywhere until Colleen returned. When Colleen went inside, Martha was back in her bed asleep. Colleen went as far as accusing me of exaggerating the whole thing until she found the knife next to Martha's bed. To not give her any more fuel to blame me for any of this, I left out the fact that I ever went to sleep. But that doesn't mean that I felt in any way I did anything wrong. Colleen even offered me that room to sleep. I never worked in that house again. Martha was a scarier patient than I'd ever dealt with in any of my jobs in my 9 years of being a direct care aide. It was my first day working for this plumbing company. I was called in for my first job to this house out of town. The plumbing company had 5 employees, and the owner would choose who does what job. I don't see it as a coincidence that I was sent to some undesirable job far away in a shitty area for my first job. The call was for a leaky pipe under the sink, which is typically the easiest, most basic job to get a call for, depending on the root cause of it. I pulled up to the house, my first ever call, and it was an absolutely disgusting looking house, completely run down as if no one had lived there for years. I went up to the house and knocked until a middle-aged man opened the door. I didn't like his aura from the start. He had this unflattering, disproportionately wide smile that made his entire face appear off-putting. His voice was also really soft and high-pitched, not the voice I was expecting to come out of his mouth. Or maybe it was, given his unusual appearance. He welcomed me inside of the house. I realized there wasn't a single piece of furniture in the house. "Just moved in?" I asked him. He replied yes, and then chuckled. Or maybe I should say he giggled, because it was just a weird, high-pitched little laugh. He brought me to the kitchen, and the first thing I did was set my stuff down on the counter, then open the cabinets under the sink. I slid myself under the sink and started to examine the pipe, specifically looking at the P-trap and the lock nuts to make sure they weren't overly tight or loose. I noticed the man was standing directly over me, his legs spread wide so that I was sandwiched between both of his feet. It was extremely uncomfortable. I asked him politely to give me some space, and he backed up a bit, but not enough that would make me feel comfortable. I realized that I didn't see any water leaking at all, so I got out from under the sink and tried running the water, but no water came out of the faucet. I looked at the weird man and asked him why the water wasn't running. He said he must have shut off the main water valve without realizing it. When I say I stood there speechless for a few seconds, I'm not exaggerating. I asked him bluntly, "How do you do something like that by mistake?" He smiled and shrugged his shoulders. I asked him to go turn the water valve back on. He turned and said he'd be right back, and I saw him leave the kitchen, but then I heard footsteps walking upstairs. I'd never in my life heard of a water valve being upstairs in any house. I knew something was off with this guy and the situation. Everything from the condition of this house to his mannerisms. And then I started hearing multiple sets of footsteps from upstairs, coming down the steps quickly. In a split second, I decided I was out of there. I grabbed my stuff and quickly walked out to the front door and to my van. I'm a pretty large and loud dude, so I'm not really intimidated very easily by people in a physical way. But there was something about that situation and that guy that told me that some shit was about to go down. I looked at the house for a second, and then I drove away. I called Dave, my boss, letting him know it was just some kind of prank, because that just sounded better than me saying I was scared of that guy. I did a few minutes worth of investigating and found out that that was just a vacant, abandoned house. I got the number that made the call for the alleged leaky pipe from Dave, and it turned out to be a voice over IP number, not even a real number. I reported this shady encounter with the local police department just so that they would be aware of it and maybe close off that house. I've never had a reason to return to that sketchy part of town again. I only worked for that specific plumbing company for about a year. Back in 2019, I worked for Domino's. It was my first night. I was just starting out. I was only working there because I needed the money for college, supplies for my dorm, etc. And so that night I was being trained. When you're being trained, you're accompanied by the manager on your first few deliveries to see how you do and evaluate you and train you. It was late, around 8 o'clock, and we got an order. Our store wasn't electronic like they are today. We couldn't see where the locations were on a big TV. We had to go look them up on our phones for directions. We got the directions and the pizza. I still remember the order. 4 large pizzas with 2 bottles of Pib. We load them into the car, and it was my car since I was the one being evaluated. So it was me, my manager, and another trainee who I didn't know. The house we were heading towards was way out of the way in the middle of nowhere. My town was old though, so it was fairly common to go miles without anything. It took us around 15 to 20 minutes to get there. The house looked old, really old. It was an old 2-story home and it was completely run down. The wood was chipping, some of the windows had boards on them. It was not a house you'd expect people to be living in. I remember asking my manager if we had to go up there, and he told both of us yes, but that he'd come with us and hand them the pizzas and sodas. I hesitantly got out of the car and noticed that the other guy who was new was very nervous as well about walking to that front door. We finally started making our way to it when the other trainee said he thought he saw someone watching us from the furthest window from us, upstairs. Our manager told him he's just paranoid and that this shouldn't take more than a minute or two, making sure to tell us to stay calm and be nice. I don't know how I had the courage to ring the bell, but I did, which of course didn't work, so my manager pounded on the door. No answer. We waited about 15 seconds and knocked again, harder this time. Still no answer. We were all getting impatient, and there was a smell of something rotten. We couldn't tell if it was the house or if something inside had died. Finally, after about a minute of impatiently waiting, someone opens the door, but not completely. They open the door only showing part of their face and asking who we were and what we wanted. My manager said we had their pizza, and the guy quickly unlocked the door and acted all friendly towards us. It freaked the three of us out. It was an older gentleman, in his 50s at least. He told us it took him a while to open the door because it's hard for him to get around or some shit. Our manager handed him the receipt and asked if he was paying with cash or a check, and the man told us he'd be back with the money. He left the front door open, so I looked around to see what the house looked like inside. Empty. Completely empty. No furniture or anything in that house. Just the floor and a couple of blankets. Obviously this guy was homeless and was just living here since no one else was. That's when we heard footsteps coming from upstairs. More than one person too. That's when we got uncomfortable about the situation. The realization of what the other employees said became true. Someone was probably watching us as we walked to the front door. My manager yelled out if the man had the money yet, but he never got a response back. The footsteps stopped. Everything just stopped. It became silent. You could just hear the three of us breathing. My manager told us to stay at the front door in case the man came back, and that he'd go around the house to see if the man needed help or something. We nodded at him and he walked towards the back. The two of us heard footsteps, but not from upstairs. They were coming from below us somehow. We both looked completely puzzled and confused, and honestly uneasy about this entire situation. That's when we heard our manager scream and heard frantic running. He ran to the front of the house where both of us were and told us to go back into the car and that we're leaving. I've never driven a car faster in my life. My manager explained to us that when he was walking around to the back, he saw a group of people in the darkness surrounding a sort of makeshift campfire, but it was very small. He got closer to them and noticed in the middle was a baby deer. The group of men were sitting around laughing at it as if they found it funny. The minute he said that, my heart almost stopped. The new guy and I quit right after, and I heard the manager quit a month after this. I'd never worked a delivery job again. Obviously, we walked into some kind of cult meeting, and I'm just glad we left when we did.